Hi, English 101. This lecture will cover a whole bunch of different assorted stuff. So parts 2 and 3 of Everything's an Argument and Essay 2. I'm sorry if you hear any background noise. My kid's in the other room with my husband and he's 4, my kid, and sometimes he makes a ruckus. So anyway, here I will just try to introduce you to the basic stuff that you'll be in a basic way to the stuff that you'll be reading in parts 2 and 3 of the textbook. I'm not going to go into extreme depth on everything, but I want to just give you an overview of what's there so that as you're reading it'll make more sense and you'll kind of know what to look for. Um, Also, all of this is leading up to essay assignment number 2, which is an analysis of a visual argument. So you'll find several chapters in this reading assignment to be particularly relevant to this essay, although they'll all be relevant in a more less direct way. So anyway, chapter 7 focuses on structuring arguments and the different ways that arguments can be structured, or some of the different ways that arguments can be structured. In English 101 classes, we tend to focus on Tolman-style arguments, which are covered in depth in this chapter, and those are the arguments that are structured beginning with a claim, and then with support for a claim, and then maybe with addressing warrants directly, which are kind of like assumptions that you're making in your argument, and then perhaps a rebuttal towards the end of the argument where you're examining opposing standpoints and then trying to sort of argue against them. So anyway, claim, support, warrant, rebuttal is the traditional kind of way that arguments are covered these days, at least in English 101 classes, and this chapter does cover those, as I mentioned, but then also this chapter covers classical oration, so like classical argumentation. You'll hear some Latin words there and be excited by them maybe, and then also Rogerian and invitational arguments are covered here as well. So those are just different ways to structure arguments, basically. And we've talked about an argument as just being an arguable statement, or a statement that people would need support in order to kind of agree with, followed by support for that statement or evidence for that statement. So that's just like the basic way maybe to understand an argument. Any kind of a perspective on an issue or a position that you're taking is an argument. So chapters 8 through 12 cover in more depth what was already covered in part 1 of the textbook. So you've already read about all of the different types of arguments that this textbook will cover, and then chapters 8 through 12 give extreme detailed overviews of those types of arguments. So arguments of fact, arguments of definition, evaluation arguments, causal arguments, don't read that as casual, don't misread it as casual, and then proposal arguments. So arguments of fact, as you know, rest on a central claim of value. They have to do with arguing that something is the case, something will be the case, something was the case, and a difference between just a regular old fact and an argument of fact, as I mentioned earlier in the quarter, is that an argument of fact actually merits an argument. It rests on a claim that merits an argument. So a simple fact like, this desk that I'm sitting at is made of wood, doesn't really require an argument because it's just a simple fact that anyone could see. But using desks for wood will eventually make us run out of wood. Using wood for desks will eventually make us run out of wood, or something would be kind of a silly argument because we can grow more, I guess, but that would be an argument of fact, maybe not a very good one. Anyway, arguments of definition are arguments that have to do with how we ought to define a particular term, or how a particular term ought to be defined. So these often are terms that are kind of politically charged or that have implications for people. Evaluation arguments are arguments that have to do with the value of something, or the worth of something, or the meaning of something, or your interpretation of something. So when you've written an essay before, maybe about a piece of literature, and you've argued what you think it means, you're writing an evaluation argument. But anytime you're arguing that something is good or bad, beneficial or detrimental, you're making an evaluation argument as well. Causal arguments are arguments that have to do with basically arguing that one thing is causing another thing, or that the effects of doing something will be such and such. Those types of arguments are causal arguments. Proposal arguments have to do with proposing a specific course of action that you think you ought to take, or others ought to take, or we all ought to take. So those are covered, as I mentioned, in depth in chapters 8 through 12. So expect that as you're reading part 2. And then we're on to part 3, so that's pretty much all that's in part 2. The reading assignments in this textbook, you've probably discovered, look like they're going to be really long, and then there's a lot of stuff that kind of you can breeze through pretty quickly. There are visuals, there are little exercise boxes, there are essays which you can read, but the actual meat of the chapters doesn't take a terribly long time to get through. So we're already into part 3 now, and chapter 13, which is the first chapter of part 3, covers style in arguments. So pretty much this chapter covers stuff like word choice, sentence structure, and figurative language. A lot of the chapter is devoted to figurative language, which are all of those kind of like literary and rhetorical devices that you've probably studied in a high school English class, such as hyperbole and metaphor and personification and all that kind of stuff. So figurative language is language that turns one thing into another thing or represents something in a particular way. So this might be kind of interesting to you. And this is all stuff that's adding to your vocabulary as a person who can analyze arguments and write arguments. So when you're criticizing an argument, or you're analyzing an argument, or you're doing a rhetorical analysis of an argument, these are all terms that you can use or strategies that you can use for doing that. So chapters 14 through 16 cover, first of all, chapter 14 covers visual arguments, and since essay 2 that you'll be writing very soon in the class has to do with analyzing a visual argument, this chapter will be particularly useful for you, I hope. And it covers logos, pathos, and ethos in visual arguments. So how visual arguments are made, how they're effective or not so effective, and then how they might utilize logos, pathos, and ethos, which you're already familiar with because we covered them in chapter 1, or part 1 of the textbook. Then chapter 15 covers something that might not be so useful to you in this class, but I'm going to have you just glance at it anyway because it might be useful to you in another class. Are you in classes that require you to give presentations but don't really tell you how to do that? If so, chapter 15 might be useful to you now or in the future if you keep your book. I know I had to do a lot of presentations in college and grad school. They made me super uncomfortable. I always felt like I didn't know what I was doing. Chapter 15 would have benefited me, so I hope it helps you in other classes. Although we're not going to be giving presentations in this class. You can rest easy. Multimedia arguments are covered in chapter 16, and this might be useful to you in essay 2 as well, because essay 2 has to do with analyzing visual arguments, specifically a visual advertisement. So that's what's in chapters 14 through 16. And then we're pretty much done with parts 2 and 3 of the textbook. Wow, that print is really tiny. I apologize. This looked different when I made the PowerPoint, and it's too late now. So what's on this slide, if you can't see it, because it's like microscopically small, I'm squinting and I'm getting really close to the screen to see it, is just a copy of what's already in essay assignment 2. So if you can't read this, don't worry. Just go to the writing assignments and resources part module of our class and look at the essay assignments document. And essay assignment 2 looks exactly like this, except it's larger and won't hurt your eyes to read, I hope. So what's here is just a copy of that, and I just want to go through what I'm expecting for essay assignment 2. So first of all, the suggested length for this is 2 to 3 pages. Like I mentioned for essay assignment 1, that's not a strict guideline. So if you write a little bit more, a little bit less, it's not really a big deal. But if you're doing the assignment as I'm asking you to do it and you're double spacing it and you're kind of doing it in a thorough way, but you're not overdoing it, it'll probably end up being about 2 or 3 pages. If you're using Times New Roman font, 12-point, 1-inch margins, if you're formatting it kind of in a standard way. So what you do for essay assignment 2 is pick an advertisement that's visual. So this can be something on TV, it can be from a web source, it can be a newspaper or magazine advertisement, pretty much any advertisement that's in visual form, something you can look at, you could use it. And it can have words on it, but it needs to have some kind of a visual, picture-y, or video-y component as well. I'll define that loosely, I guess. So find some kind of a visual ad that you think is horrible or wonderful, or it intrigues you, or it confuses you. Pick one that you find interesting for some reason, or that you have something to say about. And then think about the parts of our book that have emphasized visual rhetoric or visual argumentation. So ever since part 1 of the textbook, visual arguments have kind of been worked in here or there. There are several chapters that you just read that focus exclusively almost on visual arguments, such as chapters 14 and 16. But consider the parts of our book that have covered visual argumentation, and then consider the advertisement that you've chosen, and write an essay that analyzes the visual rhetoric that's used in this advertisement. So the structure of your essay can be exactly like you did in the last essay. You can write, the introduction, the first body paragraph that summarizes the source, the second body paragraph that describes the tactics that are used in it. You can do that if you want to, or you can do it kind of your own way. If you want to write the essay and devote several paragraphs to visual rhetoric and several paragraphs to the success or failure of the advertisement or to the message it conveys, that's okay too. So don't feel limited in this essay assignment by the 5-paragraph essay model. You can use it if it feels safe to you and if you're used to it. Don't feel bound by it though. The one thing that I will ask though is that your thesis statement be the last sentence of your introduction and that you have a series of focused body paragraphs that support that thesis statement and a conclusion at the end of your essay. So make sure you're really using like an essay structure that we would use in an academic setting, like the one that I introduced to you last time when you wrote your first essay. But as long as you're writing an essay that's structured around a thesis statement and that supports a thesis statement and that has paragraphs, that's okay. And just make sure that the essay focuses on analyzing a visual advertisement in the way that you analyzed an argument in essay assignment 1. So in essay assignment 1, you picked apart the rhetoric that was used in an op-ed piece or an editorial, and you discussed what kind of rhetoric was used and then whether you thought it was effective. You're going to be doing the same thing in essay assignment number 2, except with a visual argument instead of a written argument that has like words only. So analyze the visual rhetoric that's used, color, placement of images, types of images, anything at all that you want to analyze, you can analyze that appears in the ad. And then decide whether you think it's successful or not so successful or what message it conveys. So any of those things are appropriate to focus on. I hope this helps with essay assignment 2. If you have questions about it or if I've confused you, please don't hesitate to ask and I can try to point you in the right direction. The process that you can go through with essay number 2 is similar to the process that you went through with essay 1. First, choose the visual ad that you want to use, then reread the parts of the book that apply to this essay assignment. I'm going to suggest 14 and 16, chapters 14 and 16, but there are other parts that cover visual ads that are kind of like sprinkled, or visual arguments, not visual ads, visual arguments that are like sprinkled throughout parts 1 through 3 of the textbook. So it might help to like glance at those before you write this essay. And you can use the index in the book to find those. And then write a draft of your essay, submit it for peer review. Don't forget that in order to get points for the peer review, you have to do the peer review that you're assigned. So just submitting a draft will get you assigned somebody to review, but it won't actually get you any points. So make sure you follow the directions that I've posted in the module for the week. Make sure to answer the questions and do everything kind of as I'm asking you to do it to get full credit there. And then after that, submit the essay to me for grading. I'll make every effort to have essay 1 back to you before essay 2 is due so that you'll have some time to digest my comments and your grade and maybe keep doing what you're doing well in essay number 2 and work on the things that you need to work on that I'm mentioning in essay 2. So if you have questions about any of this, let me know. I hope this helped to clarify parts 2 and 3 of the book, or at least to sort of like outline them for you so that you know what to expect as you're reading them. And I hope that I've clarified essay assignment number 2 for you as well.